November 8, 1943. Rechlin Experimental Airfield, Brandenburg. The frost on the runway cracked beneath Hauptmann Hans-Joachim Hermann's boots as he approached the aircraft that would teach him Germany had already lost the war. Through morning fog, the bomber's silhouette emerged, four engines, high-mounted wings, that distinctive tail. But the markings were wrong. Black crosses. Swastika rudder. This flying fortress belonged to the Luftwaffe now, captured intact 3 weeks prior when its crew belly-landed near Chartres after sustained fighter damage. They'd coded it T9 plus FK. Hermann would fly it for the first time today. He'd test-flown 47 aircraft types in 2 years without incident, Spitfires, P-38s, even a Soviet PE-2, but the B-17 represented something different. This wasn't just another enemy fighter to evaluate for weaknesses. This was America's strategic sword, the weapon devastating German cities with methodical efficiency. Understanding it meant understanding how badly outmatched Germany truly was. What Hermann discovered in the sky that morning, and in the months that followed, would confirm his darkest suspicions about American industrial capacity. The defensive firepower alone staggered him, but the production numbers behind it would haunt him for the rest of his life. 3 weeks earlier, October 18, 1943, Lieutenant Richard Brennan piloted B-17F serial 42 to 30,632, call sign Angels of Mercy, as part of the 351st Bombardment Group's mission against ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. The raid, history would call it Black Thursday, cost the 8th Air Force 60 bombers shot down and 17 damaged beyond repair. Brennan's fortress took cannon shells through both wings, lost 2 engines, and trailed fuel vapor that turned his bomber into a flying match waiting for ignition. His navigator was dead, bombardier unconscious from oxygen loss, tail gunner wounded. Brennan couldn't reach England. The Channel meant certain death. Neutral Switzerland lay too far with failing engines. He chose survival over duty, pointing his dying bomber toward the nearest flat ground in occupied France. The wheels-up landing at Chartres came hard but controlled, years of training compressed into 90 seconds of crisis management. The fuselage scraped across winter wheat fields, plowing a trench 400 feet long before shuddering to rest. 9 men stumbled out, hands raised to Wehrmacht soldiers already converging. Within 2 hours, Luftwaffe engineers arrived from Paris, understanding immediately what they'd captured. Most downed bombers arrived in fragments scattered across square miles. This one sat essentially intact, damaged but reparable, every system accessible for study. By nightfall, they'd photographed every component, catalogued every serial number, measured every gun mounting angle. By dawn, recovery crews had transported it to Évreux airfield for temporary repairs. 1 week later, escorted by 3 Bf-109s with explicit orders radioed to every flak battery along the route, a German crew ferried Angels of Mercy to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's premier test facility 50 miles north of Berlin. There, it would teach Hermann and his team everything they needed to know about American defensive doctrine and industrial philosophy. Rechlin existed for one purpose: understanding enemy technology. Hundreds of engineers, technicians, and test pilots worked in razor-wire compounds, dissecting captured Allied aircraft for exploitable weaknesses and worrying trends. By late 1943, the trends were deeply worrying. American equipment kept improving while German production struggled under Allied bombing. Every captured bomber revealed sophisticated manufacturing, standardized components, interchangeable parts, quality control suggesting production scales that seemed impossible. Yet intelligence confirmed it. Boeing, Douglas, and Vega were building B-17s faster than combat could destroy them. The bomber before Hermann had undergone 6 weeks of exhaustive examination before he'd touched the controls. Engineers had removed panels, traced wiring, tested hydraulics, measured fuel capacity, weighed components, analyzed aluminum alloys, photographed every rivet pattern. They'd test-fired every machine gun into ballistic arrays, calculating muzzle velocities, dispersion patterns, effective ranges. They documented everything in reports that circulated to fighter units across Europe, hoping tactical intelligence might compensate for strategic disadvantages. What emerged was a portrait of an aircraft designed not for elegance but for industrial production and crew survival. Every design choice prioritized manufacturing speed and battlefield durability. Straight panels with minimal compound curves. Simplified stamping operations. Standardized fasteners throughout. Reduced inventory complexity. Modular assemblies that bolted together. Parallel construction at multiple factories. Self-sealing fuel tanks. Crew comes home to fly again. The B-17 wasn't art. It was engineering pragmatism executed with industrial excellence. But the defensive armament commanded the most intense study. 9 Browning M2 machine guns of .50 caliber, 10 on later G models with the chin turret, positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire across nearly every approach angle. The tail position alone, in its powered Cheyenne turret, could bring 2 guns to bear on pursuers with 500 rounds per gun. The dorsal turret added 2 more, capable of engaging targets across the entire upper hemisphere. The ball turret beneath, that claustrophobic sphere where the smallest crew member crouched with knees to chest, covered everything below with 360-degree traverse. Waist gunners stood at open windows in sub-zero hurricane winds, manning flexible guns that covered beam attacks. Nose positions, 2 cheek guns plus bombardier's flexible mount, handled frontal threats, though early models were weakest here. German pilots had learned this through blood. The standard rear approach that worked against He-111s or Soviet bombers meant flying into concentrated fire from at least 4 heavy machine guns. Luftwaffe after-action reports documented the carnage, fighters shredded at 600 yards, pilots killed before firing a shot, wings torn off by .50 caliber impacts. Hermann climbed through the waist gunner window, immediately noting the crude repair welding where cannon shells had penetrated. Inside, the bomber felt utilitarian, no wasted space, every cubic foot serving function. He squeezed through the narrow passage toward the cockpit, passing gun positions that now stood empty but had recently held men fighting for their lives. The cockpit surprised him with its spaciousness compared to German designs. 2 pilots sat side by side with proper instrumentation for both, redundancy again. American philosophy: if one pilot dies, the other can bring the crew home. The instrument panel layout confused him initially, different logic than German cockpits, different gauge positions. But after 20 minutes of study, he recognized the pattern: standardization. Every B-17 cockpit was identical. American pilots trained once and could fly any fortress in the fleet. German practice varied, different factories, different instrument arrangements, pilots retraining for each variant. He started engines 1 through 4 following the checklist they'd translated from a captured manual. Each Wright Cyclone Art 1820 radial caught with a cough and settled into a deep rumble, 1,200 horsepower per engine. 16,000 horsepower turning 4 Hamilton standard propellers. The bomber trembled with contained violence. Taxiing felt ponderous, this was no nimble fighter. 30 tons at combat weight, sitting high on narrow landing gear that made ground handling tricky. But once airborne, the fortress transformed. Control response felt smooth, predictable, surprisingly docile for such mass. Hermann climbed to 15,000 feet and began evaluation tests that would continue for months. He shut down 1 engine, the bomber flew fine. 2 engines, still controllable, though performance degraded. He understood now why so many damaged B-17s made it home across the channel. This aircraft forgave pilot errors and absorbed battle damage that would doom German designs. The combat doctrine became clear: mass formation flying where individual bombers provided mutual fire support. He'd studied intelligence photos showing American combat boxes, 18 to 27 bombers in tight geometric arrays, each aircraft's guns covering its neighbor's blind spots. Attacking such formations meant facing not 9 guns but hundreds, all concentrating fire on your fighter. The mathematics were brutal. A single B-17 firing all guns produced roughly 135 rounds per second across all positions. A squadron box of 9 bombers, 1,200 rounds per second filling the air. A group box of 27 bombers, 3,600 rounds per second. And American raids now involved multiple groups, dozens of boxes, hundreds of bombers, tens of thousands of machine gun rounds per second, creating storms of fire that German pilots described as walls of tracers. Hermann landed after 2 hours, hands cramped from wrestling controls, mind racing with implications. In the debriefing room, he faced Oberst Werner Kripe, Rechlin's commanding officer, and a delegation of Luftwaffe commanders who traveled from Berlin specifically to understand the fortress threat. Hermann chose honesty over optimism. "The defensive firepower is extraordinary," he began, pointing to the coverage diagram an engineer had prepared. "Attacking from behind is suicide unless you're exceptionally skilled and lucky. The tail and dorsal turrets create interlocking fire that shreds fighters at 600 yards. Beam attacks face waist guns plus the dorsal turret, still lethal. Below is covered completely by the ball turret. The only viable approach is frontal, from 12 o'clock high." He paused, knowing his next words would disturb them. "But even frontal attacks demand extreme nerve and precision. You're closing at 500 miles per hour combined. 2 seconds from firing range to collision. Early models like this F variant have weak nose defense, just flexible guns. But intelligence reports the G model has a chin turret, which means frontal attacks now face concentrated fire too. The Americans are adapting." Kripe leaned forward. "Can our fighters defeat these formations?" Hermann met his eyes. "Individual aircraft? Yes. Skilled pilots using proper tactics can down them. I've studied reports from JG-2, JG-26, pilots like Egon Mayer developed frontal attacks that work. But here's what troubles me." He gestured to production charts on the wall. "Our intelligence estimates Boeing alone produces 300 B-17s monthly. Douglas and Vega add another 150 combined. That's 450 bombers per month, 15 daily, from American factories our bombers can't reach. Meanwhile we're losing 50, 60, 70 heavy fighters monthly over the Reich. Simple mathematics, they replace losses faster than we inflict them." The room fell silent. Kripe's jaw tightened. "Then we must improve our kill ratio. Better tactics, heavier armament. The 30mm cannon increases our lethality per hit." "Yes," Hermann interrupted, risking insubordination. "But it doesn't change industrial capacity. For every fortress we shoot down, they build 3 more while we struggle to replace our fighters and train new pilots. You asked if we can defeat them. Tactically, in individual engagements? Sometimes. Strategically, across hundreds of raids." He shook his head. "The aircraft I flew today represents a manufacturing philosophy we cannot match. Mass production, standardization, quality at scale. This isn't about courage or skill anymore. It's mathematics." Nobody argued. They'd all seen the reports, the graphs tracking German fighter losses against American bomber numbers. The curves diverged catastrophically. Even Pyrrhic victories, shooting down 50 bombers while losing 30 fighters, favored the Americans when production was factored in. The captured fortress had taught them what they'd feared: battlefield heroism couldn't compensate for industrial disparity. Over subsequent months, Hermann flew Angels of Mercy dozens more times, each flight revealing new insights. He tested maximum altitude, 32,000 feet, higher than many German fighters could sustain combat. He measured cruise endurance, over 6 hours with combat load, explaining how fortresses reached Berlin from England. He evaluated the Norden bombsight, crude optics compared to German precision engineering, but adequate for the Americans' quantity over perfection philosophy. He practiced defensive maneuvers, discovering the bomber could absorb violent evasive action that would tear apart German designs. The stressed skin construction distributed loads efficiently, allowing pilots to throw the 30-ton aircraft through banks and skids that disrupted fighter aim. Self-sealing fuel tanks worked brilliantly, He'd watched ground crews shoot standard rifle rounds through a tank that sealed itself within seconds. German bombers still used unprotected tanks that turned into fireballs from single bullet strikes. Rechlin's engineers calculated that downing a B-17 required an average of 20 direct hits from 20mm cannon shells, assuming dispersion across vital areas. Pilot accuracy against maneuvering targets at combat ranges averaged 2%, confirmed by analyzing gun camera footage from hundreds of engagements. Therefore, destroying one fortress required firing approximately 1,000 rounds. Early FW-190 fighters carried 500 rounds total across 2 cannons. Upgraded variants with 4 cannons managed 600 rounds. Which meant each fighter had ammunition for 1 sustained attack run, maybe 2 if the pilot was disciplined and accurate. After that, Winchester, compelled to break off and return to base for rearming. Meanwhile, the bombers flew on, their 7,500 rounds of distributed ammunition allowing sustained defensive fire throughout the entire mission. The fortress absorbed damage, kept flying, kept fighting. The tactical problem was solvable, but the strategic equation was not. Hermann understood this with crystalline clarity as he reviewed intelligence estimates. Over 12,000 B-17s would be built before war's end. 12,000. Germany's entire 4-engine bomber production across all types barely reached 2,000. The He-177, their only operational heavy bomber, suffered chronic engine fires that made crews refuse to fly them. No German bomber matched the B-17's range, payload, defensive firepower, or, most critically, production numbers. The captured fortress revealed not just tactical specifications but an indictment of German strategic planning. They'd started a war assuming quick victory before enemies mobilized their economies. That assumption had failed. Now they faced industrial attrition against opponents whose factories they couldn't bomb, whose resources they couldn't match, whose production capacity rendered battlefield victories meaningless. In spring 1944, Hermann participated in a classified briefing for fighter unit commanders being posted to Reich defense duties. 60 pilots crowded into Rechlin's briefing hall, many recently transferred from the Eastern Front where Luftwaffe still maintained local superiority against Soviet air forces. These men expected tactical instruction, attack angles, gun positions, ammunition management. Hermann gave them truth instead. "You've fought Sturmovix, PE-2s, Soviet bombers with minimal defensive armament," he began, standing before the captured B-17, now painted in full Luftwaffe colors. "Forget everything you learned. This aircraft changes aerial warfare fundamentally." He walked around the bomber, pointing out each gun position. Tail turret, 2.50 caliber guns, 500 rounds each, powered traverse, excellent visibility. Approaching from behind means engaging multiple bombers simultaneously while taking fire from at least 4 guns per fortress. Your closing speed gives you perhaps 4 seconds in effective range. During those 4 seconds, these guns fire 100 rounds combined. Now multiply by 9 bombers in a squadron box. Now by 3 squadron boxes in a group. The mathematics are lethal. He paused, letting it sink in. Frontal attacks work better, briefly. You die from above and ahead, ideally from 30 degrees high, firing at 250 yards and breaking under at 100 yards. 2-second window. Requires absolute nerve because collision is constant risk. Some of you will press too hard and die in mid-air collisions. Some will break too early and waste ammunition. He showed gun camera footage captured from German fighters, grainy film of B-17s growing larger, tracers reaching out, the moment of firing, the desperate breakaway. Then footage of bombers absorbing hits and continuing to fly. Then footage of fighters disintegrating under defensive fire. "You are the best pilots Germany has," Hermann continued. "You're skilled, experienced, brave. And you're going to face formations of 300, 400, sometimes 500 of these bombers escorted by equal numbers of P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts. The Americans will keep coming. Every day. You'll fly 4, 5 missions daily until you're killed, wounded, or too exhausted to continue. Your life expectancy, statistically, is 6 weeks from today. He let that statement settle, watched faces pale, jaws clench. I'm not telling you this to demoralize you. I'm telling you because you deserve truth. You will shoot down bombers. You'll achieve victories. Individual courage matters. But understand what you're facing, an industrial system that builds bombers faster than you can destroy them, that trains crews faster than you can kill them, that replaces losses overnight while we scramble for spare parts. Learn your tactics. Exploit every weakness. Come home alive whenever possible. But know that tactical excellence cannot overcome strategic disadvantage at this scale. The briefing ended in heavy silence. Later, 3 pilots approached Hermann privately, asking the question they couldn't voice publicly: can we win? Hermann considered lying, offering false hope. But these men would be dead within months if they didn't understand reality. No, he said simply. Not militarily. The captured fortress proves it. Individual skill means nothing against systematic superiority. We lost this war the day we failed to knock out American industrial capacity in 1942. Now we're just fighting to determine the terms and cost of the inevitable. By summer 1944, Angels of Mercy was one of 4 captured B-17s operating from Rechlin and associated facilities. A 5th, designated 7+8, had been captured in Denmark when its crew belly landed after engine failure. Hermann had flown it out of a farm field with no pre-flight, no checklist, just his understanding of fortress systems gained from months on Angels. That flight, blind improvisation based on systematic knowledge, represented the pinnacle of his test pilot career. The fact that he could do it at all testified to the B-17's docile handling and logical design. Some captured fortresses were transferred to KG-200, the Luftwaffe's special operations wing that flew clandestine missions deep into Allied territory using captured aircraft for deception. German crews in American bombers could penetrate radar coverage, join returning Allied formations, gather intelligence on tactics and communications. The missions were dangerous. If Allied fighters detected the deception, the German crew faced overwhelming firepower with no formation support, but occasionally achieved remarkable intelligence coups. Hermann flew one such mission in August 1944, though details remained classified even in his post-war memoirs. He'd say only that it involved night flight to Allied-controlled France, using the B-17 silhouette and IFF transponder codes obtained through intelligence channels to avoid interception. The mission succeeded, barely, but convinced him that special operations couldn't change strategic outcomes. Clever deception bought tactical advantages but couldn't match the fundamental imbalance in resources and production. As 1944 ground toward its bloody conclusion, Hermann watched the strategic bombing campaign systematically dismember German industry. Attacks on oil production facilities strangled fuel supplies. By autumn, many Luftwaffe fighters sat grounded despite being undamaged. Attacks on transportation networks prevented delivery of parts and materials. Attacks on ball-bearing factories disrupted manufacturing chains. Attacks on aircraft production plants destroyed assembly capacity. The fortresses kept coming. The defensive firepower that had impressed him in 1943 now seemed almost secondary to the relentless industrial persistence behind it. Even when German fighters achieved outstanding kill ratios, one November day saw JG-300 down 48 bombers for 18 fighter losses, historically impressive, it changed nothing strategically. By the next week, American formations had replaced those losses and continued the campaign. By February 1945, Rechlin itself came under regular air attack. Allied fighters strafed the airfield, destroying parked aircraft including captured types. Bombing raids targeted facilities and infrastructure. Hermann flew Angels of Mercy to a dispersal field 30 kilometers away, hiding it under camouflage netting in a forest clearing. It survived until April 20, 1945, when advancing Soviet forces overran the area. Rather than allow capture, Hermann personally destroyed the bomber, placing demolition charges in the wings and fuselage, then watching from 200 meters as the fortress that had taught him Germany's strategic doom erupted in flames. He felt oddly sentimental watching it burn. Angels of Mercy had been an honest teacher, revealing uncomfortable truths with mechanical indifference. Hermann survived the war, surrendering to British forces in May 1945. His expertise with captured Allied aircraft made him valuable during post-war technical evaluations. He flew for British and American test programs, providing German perspective on aircraft he'd fought against and flown during the war. He published memoirs in 1978, carefully excluding classified details but acknowledging what the captured B-17s had revealed. "We understood the fortress was formidable," he wrote in the final chapter. "We documented every vulnerability, developed effective counter-tactics, trained our pilots thoroughly. We achieved local victories, shot down hundreds of bombers, made the Americans pay heavily for their campaign. But knowledge of the enemy's capabilities couldn't change the fundamental equation. America possessed industrial capacity we could never match through any realistic means. The B-17's defensive firepower impressed us greatly, 9 heavy machine guns, later 13, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned formations into aerial fortresses indeed. But the true weapon wasn't the guns. It was the industrial system that could design, manufacture, and deploy over 12,000 of these bombers while simultaneously building comparable numbers of fighters, tanks, ships, and everything else required for global war. No amount of tactical brilliance or individual courage could overcome that disparity. We learned this truth in November 1943, studying a captured bomber in a frozen hangar at Rechlin. The rest was just mathematics working itself toward inevitable conclusion. Hermann lived until 1992, long enough to see German reunification and the Cold War's end. In his final interviews, he expressed neither bitterness nor regret, only the philosophical acceptance of someone who'd witnessed history's grinding machinery. Asked what lesson the B-17 had taught him, he paused, considering. "That wars are won in factories before they're fought in skies," he said finally. "That industrial capacity determines strategic outcomes regardless of tactical competence. That respecting your enemy's capabilities is pointless if you cannot match their resources." The Fortress was a magnificent aircraft. But its real significance was what it represented, an industrial philosophy and national capacity we could study, understand, and never hope to equal. We captured one bomber. They built 12,000. That's the lesson. Everything else is just details.